Alright, so today we're going to look at how to do independent samples t-tests, and we're going to use our same data set for our ankle rehab. Right, so here we basically have two independent groups. They're not related in any way. You have the rehab group and you have the control group, and those are the groups that patients would have been placed in. So we want to know if the scores before the intervention, if it was different. Was it significantly different, or was it the same for both groups? Or what about the scores after? You could do a t-test to tell if they are different or not. So we go to analyze, we are comparing means, and we are doing independent samples. Okay? So let's say we're looking at the scores before, the lower extremity functional scale scores before intervention. I want to compare the groups. So you click the variable, you send it into test variable, and then you select group, and you put group into grouping variable. And then here you're asked to define the groups, right? So group 1, let's say group 1 is a control group, and let's say group 2 is a rehab group. There could be a situation where probably that variable had 3 or more values and you just only want to compare 2 groups out of it. That is why it gave you the option to select which group. But in our variable here for group, we have only 2 groups. So I just thought to let you know that. I will click continue. If you look at options, here we say want a 95 confidence interval of the difference in means. I'll click continue. And then we click OK. So here it shows you that the control group has a mean of 19.45 and the rehab group has a mean of 21.28. And here are the standard deviations. So this test here, and bear in mind for this test, we're assuming that they are not equal, the variances are not equal for both populations. Right, so let's look at our results. So this significant value here is about the Levene's test. So we're not really focusing on this here, right? I want to focus on this two-tailed significant value. And here it's 0.277. So this is telling us that because it's greater than 0.05, we would fail to reject the null hypothesis that states that the mean of the control group equals the mean for the rehab group. And when we look at the mean difference, we get this value here, and we'll look at the confidence intervals. If you look, these confidence intervals include 0. So there's a chance that for the low extremity functional scale score before intervention, the control group is not statistically different from the rehab group. And it's important for you guys to note as well that when you're doing independent sample t-test, you have to ensure that certain requirements are met before you do the test. So what are the requirements? So there are different scenarios, but the most common scenario would be that you're doing a t-test for 2 independent population means where the standard deviation for the population are unknown and not assumed to be equal. There are different scenarios where it could be assumed to be equal, assumed to be different, and all of that. But this method here is the most common method, and that's the test that PSPP use. But what are the requirements that you have to ensure? So the values of the standard deviation for both populations must be unknown and not assumed to be equal. The 2 samples have to be independent. They are not related to each other in any way. And again, the samples have to be simple random samples, and either of these 2, the populations that they're taken from the values are normally distributed in that population, or the sample that we use, that both samples have a sample size greater than 30. So it's important to check that these requirements are met before you do your independent sample t-tests. Okay, say now we wanted to do the same independent sample t-test, and we want to check to see what about the low extremity values after intervention. So we know that in the after intervention, the control group would not have participated in the intervention, only the rehab group. So we want to compare the scores now to see, did this intervention over whichever period, did it help to create a significant difference in low extremity functional scale scores for these ankle patients. So we'll go to analyze, still comparing means, and we are still doing independent samples. However, here we would select the scores that were before intervention and send it back, and we select the scores that are after intervention, send it forward. All the other settings remains the same, so we'll click OK. And here we see the output. So the control group, their mean post-intervention is 30.07, and there's their standard deviation, and the rehab group is 37.27. So this difference here, is this difference a statistically significant difference if we try to make an inference about the population using this data? Well, we come here to our test, right? And we're looking at this row here and say equal variance is not assumed. So remember, this is the p-value here for the Levene's test. And we're not looking at the Levene's test. We're looking at the independent samples t-test p-value. Here, it shows us that the p-value in the two tails, right, for this t-value of minus 4.64, the p-value is less than 0.001, which will tell us that we reject the null hypothesis, which states that the mean score of the control group is equal to the mean score of the rehab group post-intervention. And here we're looking at the differences, and the mean difference is minus 7.2. And if we look at the 90% confidence interval, we see that the true value could lie somewhere between minus 4.15 to minus 10.25 with a 95% confidence. Right, so this here does not include 0, so it tells us that the difference is in fact significant, and that is how you perform the independent sample t-test using PSPP.